Good morning everyone, Janie here from Dig, Plant, Water, Repeat. Today is day 2 in our Gardening for Beginners series, and today we're going to discuss how to plan your garden. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. I'm doing a whole series on gardening for beginners. I plan to release a new video every Monday, and my goal is to have you new gardeners up and going by the time gardening season is in full swing next year. I moved to this home 2 years ago, and when I started gardening, I was a total newbie beginner. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to get out there, get in the dirt, and plant some plants. So planning my garden in the beginning was purely trial and error. But now that I've learned some things and I know some things, I think that having a little knowledge of how to plan your garden will make things a lot easier and allow you to get to your goal garden a lot quicker. Step 1 to planning your garden is knowing your inspiration. What do you want your garden to look like? Do you want it to be more of a formal garden with tightly shorn hedges and topiaries and really manicured areas? Or do you want it to be a little bit more whimsical, like a secret garden or something like that? Do you want it to be drought tolerant? Do you want to focus on drought tolerant plants if you're in a really hot area? Or is that not as important to you? One of the best things to do is to go on something like Pinterest and just collect a whole bunch of photos of gardens that really appeal to you. It's not a matter of you're going to copy those pictures exactly. It's a matter of those pictures are going to inspire you to find plants that work in your area that's going to remind you of that picture. Step 2 is thinking about how much maintenance you're actually willing to do on this garden. There are some parts of a garden that take a lot of work, and I tend to like things that take a lot of work. My favorite focal point in a garden is an espalier, where the plants are kind of growing up the side of a fence or a wall, but you pretty much have to go out there about once a week for an espalier to make sure that it's nice and tight and exactly where you want it to be, and it's not growing crazy and out the edges. Hedges are like this in that they need to be shorn on a regular basis to make sure it doesn't look scraggly and messy. A more whimsical garden might take less maintenance because that's kind of the look you're going for, which is freestyle and flowing one plant into another plant. You don't want to plant a high maintenance garden if you're going to let it get out of hand and get mangy and unkempt. You're not going to love it, and your neighbors aren't going to love it either. Step 3 is thinking about interest in different seasons. Different plants, different flowers shine at different times of the year, and you really want to make sure that you have just as much interest in fall and winter as you do in spring and summer, so that you have a year-round garden that you can enjoy. When researching plants, make sure that you have some plants in your yard that peak season is in spring and summer, and some plants that peak season is in fall and winter. And this could be foliage, it could be seed heads, it doesn't have to be blooms, but just something that you can look at and enjoy during the off season. One of my favorite things to do is to go on a nursery website or a plant website, like Proven Winners website or Green Acres, our local nursery website, and you can use the search tool and you can put in your zone, and then you can put in your season of interest. So if you have a lot of spring blooming flowers and plants in your garden, use that search tool and select fall and winter, and then all these beautiful plants will come up that you know are going to give you some fall and winter interest. Okay, step 4 is plan out your anchor plants. And your anchor plants in your garden are usually your larger shrubs and your trees. These will be long-term staples in your garden that are going to be there for years and years and years. The eye usually likes odd numbers of these staple plants, and so a lot of times people will repeat 3 or 5 of the same large shrub or tree, kind of as like a nice beautiful backdrop for the garden. In my front yard, my staple plants are loropetalum, which I have quite a few dotted around the yard, and then 2 main staple plants are breath of heavens, which are flanking either side of my yard in this bright chartreuse color, and it kind of just frames this view when you look at it from the front. The next step in planning your garden after you've decided on your anchor plants is to think about your perennials. And take a look back in my first episode in Gardening for Beginners series where I go into real depth about what the different types of plants are and how to kind of think about them. So perennials will come back each year in your garden, but remember the bloom time is not as long as annuals, so you really have to think about bloom time with perennials. Which ones are going to bloom in spring, which ones are going to bloom in summer, which ones are going to bloom in fall and winter. Again, usually perennials look good in odd numbers, so you can have your anchor plant in the back and then 3 or 5 perennials just in front. Perennials will be a step down from the larger shrubs and trees. They might not last as long as shrubs and trees, but they're going to last for quite a few years longer than annuals. The next thing to think about after you've picked out your anchor plants and your perennials is start thinking about what annuals you want. Annuals will bloom for one season, but they have tons of color and they really make a pop in your garden. Annuals are actually my favorite thing to have in a garden. I just think they're so beautiful and they make such a difference. So remember, when you're planning out your garden, leave some room in the front for annuals as a dedicated annual border. Bonus for this is that you can change it every year. One year if you want to do pink, one year if you want to do purple. It makes it really fun. Step 7 in planning your garden for beginners is thinking about your watering system. I went over this a little bit in the first video for Gardening for Beginners series, but it's something you have to think about when you plan a garden. If you are going to have an irrigation system, I want you to think about where your hoses are, where it can start, and how you're going to get it to each plant that you're going to plant. Are you going to have to hire somebody to add in some more drip, or are you going to figure out how to do it yourself? Secret, it's not that hard. You can figure it out. I did. If you're going to pick out some plants that have really high water requirements, you need to know that going forward. It's going to make the maintenance of your garden that much higher. It might be worth it, but just plan for it. So after you've picked your inspiration, you've picked out your anchor plants, your perennials, your annuals, you've thought about how you're going to water these plants, I want you to start your garden journal. Every time you pick out a plant that you want, make note of the bloom time, make note of the pruning requirements, make note of the water requirements and the sun requirements. This allows you to stay really organized, and when you forget, because you know you're going to forget, you can look back at your plant journal just to remind you how to manage these plants. So after I've thought of all these steps, all the plants that I want in my garden and how I'm going to manage them, I like to write it out in a little map of my garden and kind of make a good idea of what it's going to look like with the colors and the sizes. That way I have a visual reminder of what I was thinking when I was planning it in the dead of winter, and come spring I'll remember where I had planned to put those plants that I was going to buy. So step 9, I think, is really important for new gardeners, and that's give your plants some time to establish. A new garden does not look like a mature garden. When you first plant things, unless you spend a ton of money buying tons of plants and packing them in there, it's gonna look a little sparse and you're gonna think, what did I do wrong? What did I pick wrong? Give it some time. If you give it one growing season, 1 year, you'll be shocked how big those plants will get. It'll fill in the space and it'll look so beautiful. So gardening is a lesson in patience. Give it time to establish before you make a decision on the garden. So the very last step in planning out your new garden is expect some failure. You are going to be planting a lot of plants and not all of them are going to take. It might be your fault. You might have done something wrong. It could very possibly not be your fault at all. Plants are living things and sometimes they just die. So don't get discouraged. Don't think, oh, I have a brown thumb, which is something I used to think all the time. Just give it some time. Try again. You will learn to love it. Okay, so that's it for the 10 steps in my Planning Your Garden for Beginners. I hope this video helped you get a good start on planning your garden for next season. It's a great time of year to get a cup of tea, sit by the fire, and plan out your garden and think about everything you're gonna do while you can't get out there and put your hands in the dirt like we all love to do. If this was helpful, please consider subscribing to be kept in the loop with all my new videos coming out, including my videos in my Gardening for Beginners series. I hope to see you all in another video very soon.